Hey y'all, welcome to Parent Empowerment with Mandy Drogin. I'm Mandy. I'm just a mom sitting down with real Texas parents having real conversations about what's going on in our classrooms. Today, I'm joined by John Colyandro, father of one and managing partner of Colyandro Public Affairs. John's here to give us the scoop about really what goes on inside the Capitol and how he's been instrumental in moving forward legislation that has empowered parents for years. John, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to see you, Mandy.
Yeah, well, I'm just excited for you to be here because I think there are very few people that walk the halls of the legislature every day that's really willing to tell about kind of what goes on behind the scenes and how policy is made. One of the policies that you were instrumental in was when the COVID shutdowns occurred, and the governor had, in his wisdom, the courage to say, we are going to have to help our special needs community. So you were on the front lines with him to implement and plan the SSES program, Supplemental Special Education Services Program. Can you tell us a little bit about what went on and how you worked to execute the governor's vision?
You bet. Well, again, thank you very much for having me. Thank you for all the work that you do for parents around the state. It is unquestionably true that your engagement in this whole fight has really helped get us to a better point today in terms of having the real prospect of having a universal ESA, which I'm sure we'll talk about more in a bit, but wanted to thank you for all the work that you do.
Thank you.
Yes, COVID was a difficult time for everybody. And it was especially difficult for parents with children that have special needs. As you can imagine, it's hard enough as it is with some of particularly the children that have more acute and severe disabilities. But so many parents, and correctly so, rely on their public school to access services for special needs children.
Mm-hmm.
Therapies, whether it's speech or otherwise, being able to work on occupational therapy, those types of things. And when schools closed down, all those services were shut down with them.
Mm-hmm.
So it begged a very serious and urgent question. What were those parents to do with those services shut down? And as you well know, because you and I were working together on this, that one of the big causes of frustration, perhaps even anger, was how insistent the incumbent school officials were not only closing immediately, but keeping the schools closed, only prolonging this difficult situation for parents of students with special needs. So what was before us was that President Trump, his administration, working with Congress, was appropriating and pushing money down to the states as part of the overall COVID package. One of the uses of that money was, broadly speaking, was how can you push out funds to schools, parents, whoever it may be, to help augment the losses because of the school closures. And I know you and I worked on it together. We had come up with this idea of how can we establish a grant program for parents of students with special needs. So at the time, it took, there's a considerable amount of work because we had to coordinate between the governor's office, and he was a real champion for this, the Texas Education Agency with Commissioner Morath, and even our federal partners to not only develop the program, get it funded, but then to get the program stood up so the parents could access it as quickly as possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a heavy lift, and you mentioned some leaders that were on board, even when a lot of the establishment and others that were within kind of the associations and the public school realm said this can't be done. So, thankfully, everyone kind of came together and said, "All right, let's do this. Let's do this for kids." And very quickly, I believe, if I remember the date correctly, it was January 11th of 2021 that we launched SSES. And I think it would be, to say that it was wildly successful for the special needs families that utilized it quickly. would be an understatement. So immediately, these families that were begging for help and to get their children the therapies that they needed, tutoring, and a lot of the goods and services that serve them, which then took us into the legislative session, where again, realizing the success of empowering parents with these grants was a huge winner for our kids. So then we decided to codify it.
That's right.
And then the process is that's where it got a little bit difficult, in the sense that people were trying to figure out who, and we already knew the how, right? We were successful in the parent engagement specialist really walking parents through. The system that was set up with the GEARS funding was depleted rather quickly, which is why we knew we needed to expand the program, the funding and whatnot, and pass a law to appropriate for it. So in the process of all of the SSES funding, lots of people were working on it, and at that point, it was really geared towards, prioritizing low-income kids, but all kids. And then some things happened where that we only were utilizing it for children that were enrolled in public schools. Can you talk a little bit about kind of what happened and why, while this program is only for kids in public schools, why that's really solidified the demand for universal school choice? Every single child should be eligible for the education savings accounts.
That's right. So let me answer your question by starting with something that not only pertained to that fight over the SSES programs, but certainly played out in full view for everybody last legislative session and through the special sessions for all the world to see just how doctrinaire the incumbent school crowd is in opposition to parental empowerment. The SSES program, as we just discussed, but it bears repeating, was to help parents of students with special needs.
Yes.
And we were able to get that done administratively with the governor and with the Texas Education Agency. But once it came to the legislative process to get it codified, fully funded, so we can continue to help these parents, the people who always object to parental empowerment came out in droves. And you'll remember very clearly, we had a hearing on the House side where there were representatives,
lobbyist after lobbyist after lobbyist,
representing the ISDs, come out and say, this is bad. Now, why would they say such a thing?
Right.
Well, I think it boils down to two things. The first of which is a matter of philosophy. You and I, because we believe in liberty, and we believe in the essential function of the family in our lives, think that every way in which we can empower parents to do what's best for their family, particularly in this case for their children, that's a good thing. We know that there are an awful lot of interests, lobbyists and otherwise, who disagree with that.
That's right.
For them, the power must lie within the system of public education, which, as every system is, it's impersonal, insensitive, and indifferent. As long as that big system gets its money, that's all that matters. So, despite the nobility of the program, we had a lot of objections to it. But for the really great work of people like former Senator Larry Taylor and current Appropriations Chair Greg Bonin, we wouldn't be sitting here talking about that program. You and I put a lot of effort into it. We certainly played our role, but thank God we had such great legislative champions.
Absolutely.
So the other piece of it is this. I think the interests that were opposed to codifying SSES also saw it for what it was, which was, this was without allowing for the money to be used at a private school for tuition. They really saw it as the foot in the door for an education savings account in Texas.
That's right.
And they were correct.
Yes.
That's what we were, one of the intentions, because we knew that once parents, even that subset of parents, had that ability to define for their kids with therapies, instructional materials, other things that they needed for their children's educational advancement, were empowered with it, we knew it was helping set the stage for this broader debate about education savings accounts.
That's right. And that's why they fought and said only children, only these specific children can have access to that, because that's, that's their whole thing. If you let any parent have the decision, the parent who knows and loves their child best, they'll want more decisions.
Right.
They'll want more power.
They'll want
And they'll say,
more.
"Hey, I can do this. I have the agency. I can do what's best for my child. They're not a number in your system, a widget with dollars following them. They're my child." So
Sure.
that's right. They were right. And so they, fought. And then I do remember when they made it where that it could only be kids in public schools. So you had to be in public school to be able to access this. But by that point, because the parent empowerment movement is for all parents in public schools, I'm a public school parent, that even those parents, they were willing to speak out. They were willing to say how successful it was when they were empowered with the ability to use these grants, which when it passed, it was quickly utilized by Texas families. And as of a couple months ago when I checked, there was over 76,000 families who have benefited from this program of being empowered with the choice of the services that would best serve their child. And I would like to also say, and not one count of fraud, waste, or abuse has been reported with the SSES program.
Look, SSES has been an extraordinary success from start, and hopefully there's never a finish to it. It has worked as it was conceived and as devised, and there is no more criticism of the program. Certainly there are people who would love to see it repealed for the reasons we've already stated, but the program's been a tremendous success. But the biggest reason it's been a success is that how the parents have been able to access the resources, make sound decisions for themselves and their kids, and that's what parental empowerment's all about. To sort of go back to where we started just for a second, COVID was a tragedy. It was horrible. A lot of us were 1 month, 2 months, 3 months into the pandemic. We're confused, scared. People were having to wear a mask. You had to stay home from work. You had to stay home from school. It was a difficult period of time. But what we quickly learned were two very disturbing things. That the virtual education that was being delivered was in and of itself a disaster. But why was it a disaster? And it's because what people had in stark reality, even though it was there for many, many years, they got to see live and on their computer at home what was going on at school.
Yep.
And it was extremely disturbing. And that's when it was a real point of inflection for parental empowerment movement. Now, it still hadn't been to the point where it is today because of your leadership, but nonetheless, it helped start to galvanize parents to start to think differently about what it is that they wanted to see from their kids' education. The other thing that was, really for all of us, and it's still shocking to me today, to think how insistent, both nationally, even in Texas, teachers' unions, associations of superintendents, school boards, insisting that the schools remain closed. And I think that lent more energy to the parental empowerment movement because people were saying, what's your motive now? We seem to have passed the worst of the pandemic. We seem to have certain public health measures in place to help give general protection to the students.
Yep.
And yet, they still wanted to keep the schools closed. And the only thing you can assume from that behavior is this was a group of adults that wanted to keep feeding the system, and it was a really long vacation.
Yep.
And it's a harsh thing to say, but I genuinely believe that's what their motivation was. And yet it took parents and certain political leaders to push and push and push We finally had the schools open, and at that point, what we now call the parental empowerment movement started to blossom.
That's right. That's a good recap. That's exactly correct. I think that, when you talk about what was being delivered to our kids in the classroom, the virtual classroom, one of the things that was so important is parents were truly shocked about the performance of their children academically. I can remember parents calling and saying, "I had, no idea that my child was this far behind in reading." Um, but also another aspect of that was really the value alignment problem that far too many parents are having to deal with when they realize, oh, I did not realize my child was sitting in a classroom being led by a teacher that maybe doesn't love America, or that has different views on what's age appropriate and things like that. And I think that that is something that has really been a catalyst for parents to stand up and say, I want to be a part of this parent empowerment movement. I'm choosing public schools, but I want my public schools to deliver a high quality education and I want them to align with my values.
I agree. So, to take a bit of a tangent for a moment, one of the reasons why I'm a very, very strong advocate of our accountability system was, again, back to our COVID experience, which uh, the words you just used, which were essentially parents were shocked about what was being kept from them.
Hmm.
Okay. And only through a system, a robust accountability system, can we know to some degree what's going on in the classroom, at least on an academic track, whether or not my son or daughter is at grade level or
Right.
higher, and all those things taken together, which would help ensure that there's at least an opportunity for a good education. And it's interesting to me that the same groups that are opposed to an education savings account, the same groups who wanted to keep our schools closed as long as possible, are the same groups that want to dismantle our accountability system. And the running theme of all that is keep parents out of it
Yep.
and no transparency.
That's right.
And with your leadership, we've been able to shine a really bright light on what's going on in our schools. And I think that's been extraordinarily healthy to our system. There's a lot more work that we need to do. We still need to pass our education savings account bill. But I think those things, those confluence of events, and people's realization of just how entrenched certain interests are in the public school system to keep parents out,
Yep.
keep them in the dark, has really helped galvanize this movement.
I think that's right, and that's why the parent empowerment movement, I talk a lot about the 4 pillars of parent empowerment, and the first one is transparency. Regardless of where you choose, and you should have the choice, where you send your child to school, what learning environment they're in, you must know what they're being taught and why they're being taught what it is, and that's where more and more parents, whether it's the inappropriate library books that, we passed HB 900 last year, and then the Library Association turned around and sued, and you've got all these entities. The same, the alphabet soup crew is what I've heard them called by a couple legislators because they all lock arms in saying anything that this system and the makeup of this system wants, whether it's sexually explicit materials in our libraries or low quality curriculum that's not, again, value aligned, or even some of these programs. I can't tell you how many parents have said, my child has participated in a privilege walk and they feel guilty now because there's mom and dad at home and we don't live, in an apartment or whatever. And it's just wild, really, what parents have seen going on. And of course, this isn't every school, but the reality is that the schools or the school leaders or the rogue teachers that are allowing this stuff to happen, they either need to feel the power themselves to say, this isn't happening here anymore, or they need to be gone.
That's right. Well, since you raised the issue of the inappropriate library books, and I'll repeat your words, sexually explicit.
Yes.
They're not just inappropriate, sexually explicit. It was disturbing to watch when parents would go to school board meetings, and not that I attended one, but we'd all
Everywhere.
see them at
Of
YouTube,
course.
whatever it may be. These parents go up in front of school boards and say, why is my child exposed to this book? Well, and they were all sort of hemming and hawing. And there are many occasions, not just in Texas, but around the country, when parents would read from the book in the school library and they would be asked to stop
or shut their mic off.
And sometimes escorted out of the board meetings.
Yes.
It tells you the real division that we have here between this crowd that's so entrenched in this system and parents who their first priority isn't sexually explicit books. It's not gender modification.
That's right.
It's none of those things. They want their kids to learn. That's why they're in school.
Yeah.
It's about ABCs and 1, 2, 3, and that is a basic building block for all sorts of other knowledge that's essential for a person to have to be successful in life.
Yeah.
But that crowd has always wanted keep parents out, lower the standards, not be held accountable, and all the while indoctrinate these kids in certain things. You keep saying value aligned.
Yes.
It is preposterous that any adult feels like it's an essential part of the school experience to be reading books to kids in 2nd and 3rd grade that are sexually explicit.
Right.
That's just indoctrination.
Or
There's
asking
no other
pronouns.
Correct.
Or engaging in any of these culture wars.
Correct.
That's happening, unfortunately.
It's a real thing.
Yeah.
It's a real thing. And as you know, because we're on the political and philosophical right, the left loves to say that we're engaging in a culture war. I didn't take to a elementary school library and deposit several copies of the Catechism of the Catholic Church. I'm a Roman Catholic, and say, hey kids, we all need to learn what the Catholic Church teaches about sexual morality.
That's right.
I didn't do that.
Right.
But on the other hand, it was certain people, so Library Association, other people did in fact bring sexually explicit books into elementary school libraries, and they think we're engaging in a culture war because we want that trash out of the libraries.
That's right. And the thing is that, I have another podcast with Representative Sean Theory, who was ousted because she stood up against the gender modification, which is what her constituents and 99% of parents want. And it's one of those things that why in the world is this stuff a part of our education system? Why in the world is this class warfare, the victim versus victimizer, oppressed versus oppressive, hypersexual, mentality? Why are we doing this to our kids? And it really has. And then you turn around and you say, and then we've got mental health crisis, and then we have to deal with this. And it's, they're piling all of this onto young minds that are not developed to be able to critically analyze, which is why, as you said, ABCs 1, 2, 3, I'm a big fan of the classical model, which is for centuries, that's how not just America, but developed nations, what the Western world was using, grammar, logic, rhetoric. We were teaching children 1, 2, 3's ABCs. Then we were teaching them how to think critically. And then we were teaching them how to deliver that message. That was really something that was so important. In fact, they were teaching that in the public system in England. And that was free because that was the bedrock of democracy. And at that point, a century ago, they were charging for math classes, but they wanted every child to be able to grow up and engage in kind of the system that made up a democracy or a democratic republic. So that's exactly right. I think that parents, and again, that's another reason why the parent empowerment movement, it's not just made up of parents in the public or private or homeschool, but it's parents across every political ideology. Right. And that was the great thing about talking to Representative Theory is she kind of took her gloves off and said, this is what happens. And one of the things that she talked about was what a lot of these taxpayer-funded lobbyists within that are receiving. Let me be clear, they're receiving tax dollars from our ISDs to effectively advocate for the system against parents. And she talked about kind of what goes on behind closed doors. And I think this is and I thank you for being here and all the other guests, because the only way that we truly can reform this system is to shine a light and say, here's what's going on, but we can work together to fix it.
That's right. Look, there are an awful lot of corporations, entities, nonprofits that receive taxpayer money, all of which is legitimate. So when we talk about taxpayer-funded lobbying, we're really talking about those governmental entities that have a tax base. They can impose taxes on their people, then use portions of that money to then go lobby government. I was asked by a reporter of the Houston Chronicle about this question a couple months ago at this point, I guess. And I said, it's antithetical to free government to have government lobbying government.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be happening. And I said, and a particular fine point is this. You and I both work with a lot of legislators who are really genuinely good people.
Yes.
They're invested in trying to do a good job, do the best they can representing their constituents. One part of that constituency is the superintendent, is the mayor, is the county judge. And all those groups that say taxpayer-funded lobbying ought to be legal and remain acceptable sort of missed a very fundamental aspect of what governance is all about. There is not a representative at the Capitol who doesn't take a phone call from the mayor, from the county judge, from the superintendent. They're not excluded from expressing their point of view. The issue at stake is whether or not they ought to use their power of taxation to then lobby government. And I'll repeat it. It's antithetical to free government and a free people to have that situation, and we have it in Texas, and it needs to stop.
That's right. That's exactly right. And thank you for explaining how this works. And it was interesting when we talk about this. We obviously saw this play out in the fourth special session when the taxpayers, their money was being used to have lobbyists that kind of sit there and they're sitting their texts, or they're in the back halls kind of having their conversations, when anybody that really actually knew about the legislation and knew what was in it, the ESAs, there was $500 million, less than 1% of kids at that point would have had access to it. But the system was being given an extra $7 billion on top of the $6 billion that had already gone out to public schools at the conclusion of the 88th legislature. And it was really fascinating because afterwards I'm getting calls from, I had SBOE members, State Board of Education members. I had superintendents, trustees calling me and saying, wait, what just happened here? And I had to explain to them, well, what just happened was the people that have access, the cell phone numbers to, at that point, it was 21 of the Republicans. And then obviously Democrats went in block with what, again, the unions and associations said. I said, parent empowerment is teacher and school empowerment for great leaders. What happened was the entities that receive tax dollars on behalf of your associations, your TASA, your TASB, your Public Coalition for Public Schools, like the whole, alphabet soup crew, they told and kind of threatened legislators that we're going to come after you and we're going to bring our block voting and we're going to advocate against you to stop this teeny tiny little program. I mean, in retrospect, it wasn't huge. It would have given so many families hope and an opportunity. And they did it because it took power away. So we were going to be giving almost $100 billion a year. We were going to give $4,000 teacher pay raises, $2,000 to paraprofessionals or part-time teacher workers. And just because less than 1% of parents may have had a choice, they said don't vote for this.
It reveals very starkly and disturbingly just how opposed they are to parents having power.
That's right.
And so, if you permit me to say two things about the money, and you've heard the first thing I'm about to say, you've heard me say before, which is we didn't give our opposition enough credit in this respect. Just how politically and philosophically opposed they are to parental empowerment being manifest in an education savings account. And there were a lot of people around the Capitol that had the belief, well, if we sweeten the deal, we could all cut a deal. That's the nature of the legislative process. We could all have a win. Everybody goes home happy.
Yeah.
Their response to that was no, and then hell no. There wasn't any amount of money that could be put on the table that would mollify them. And in fact, there were one or two witnesses in front of the House Public Education Committee who outwardly said it.
Yeah.
And you know what? Good for them because they were honest.
That's right.
That's how entrenched they are in opposition to parental empowerment. But the other part of it is, whether Texas Public Policy Foundation, other politically conservative organizations, we all agree that the public school system needs funds. It was
Yes.
Governor Abbott that initiated a teacher vacancy task force.
Mhm.
Part of the recommendations in there was increased teacher pay.
Yes, let's
Please
do it.
point to the person who's opposed to that.
Right.
They're not out there.
Yeah.
We agree that there ought to be maybe additional money in the system, but it needs to be really smart, targeted spending so that we can improve outcomes in public education by having better special needs programs, better not only just compensation, but classroom culture to benefit our teachers. There are ways in which we can even do a better job with tutoring,
Mhm.
all of which is targeted spending. But what we've been doing for the most part is schools are funded by this big blob of money called basic allotment.
Mhm.
That's what allows them to get all these resources, spend it however they wish.
Mm.
Whether or not it's moving the needle on outcomes is immaterial. And that's why it was so fascinating to watch them oppose the ESA so strenuously, even though money was on the table. And it says, as much as they want a lot of new money, what they want more is
Power.
parents to be shut out of the process.
That's right.
That's what they wanted more than more money.
Yes. And that's exactly correct. And it's astonishing when we talk about the political side of things, just watching it play out. I can remember seeing several of these superintendents and principals engaging in electioneering. I can remember I think it was HD60, there was a principal that got caught literally filming a pro Glenn Rogers ad from her school office. And then, of course, Benny Salo from Huffman ISD, that his own teachers were so mad about the gaslighting, right? We have to do this. We have to turn this down to protect you. I'm not going to take a pay cut in my $300,000 salary, but you don't get this $4,000 that they're trying to give you. And at least to their credit, the teacher's like, oh, that dog is not going to hunt here. And they turned him in and said, whoa, this is wild. And I'm grateful that more and more teachers, more and more parents, more and more Texans are realizing how the structure, the system, the control of power, the flow of money, they will attempt to protect that at all cost and kind of disregard parents, teachers, and kids.
Look, let me give you a concrete example. In House Bill 3 from 2019, which was a massive school finance overhaul, one of the provisions that we put in the bill was to create what's called a teacher incentive allotment.
Mhm.
The teacher incentive allotment was based on a pilot project that was done in Dallas Independent School District. And the basic premise was that when we can identify high-performing teachers, let's get them past this basic salary schedule, which basically rewards longevity.
Mhm.
And so they can really accelerate their pay And in the early stages, and the incentive allotment is still rolling out statewide, there have been multiple examples of teachers now making in excess of $100,000 because they've been proven to be effective in the classroom, which is
What we
what
want.
it's exactly what we want. Again, the same kind of people that oppose parents, oppose choice, oppose transparency on a day-to-day, year-to-year basis are working against the interests of teachers.
Yes.
We've the report from the Teacher Vacancy Task Force, which the governor ordered, created by TEA, had outstanding recommendations, and many of the recommendations stem from direct testimony on the part of public school teachers who talked about, of course, pay and benefits,
Hmm.
but also about problems with classroom discipline, among other things.
Yes.
The same group of people opposed the recommendations of the Teacher Vacancy Task Force. And to go back to where we started here, back on special needs students, there was a separate commission on special needs financing. Senator Benton-Court, soon to be former Representative J.C. Jatan, really worked very hard on that task force to develop how we can better improve services and support for special needs students. There was a vote on that committee to include essentially an ESA proposal in the final report. Those representatives who served on that task force, who opposed school choice, opposed it in that bill. And just like a number of other key bills, including the ESA bill, the Special Needs Financing Commission proposals all fell by the wayside because of the same opposition.
Yep.
This is how entrenched they are.
That's right. And it's really important for our listeners to understand when we talk about this. One of the things that is so important about education savings accounts is that parents can direct the funds to be used for tuition at an accredited private school. They can be used for tutoring and therapy and curriculum and a whole host of fee for transportation if you're in a location you need transportation. But the really important distinction that I want parents to understand, regardless of where you are, is it's at the parent's discretion of where your child's going to get the best education. And you alluded to this a little bit when you were talking about how funding works. I think a lot of times parents and Texans think that children that there's a dollar sign attached to a balloon that like follows them into the classroom, and that especially for special needs students and things like that, that if your child has a larger amount allocated for their special need or whatnot, that follows them. And the reality is what happens for our students is money just goes into a big old pot, and there's no guarantee that, especially if your child needs services, that money is used for your child. Once the money is appropriated for your child, it goes into the discretion of superintendents, school boards. And I'll also note that one of the things that I found, and I wasn't told this until afterwards, I didn't see it in HB3 in 2019, but that there was some shenanigans going on behind the scenes. No surprise when you've got massive bills and you're really trying to get somewhere. But that some entities, again, the same people, the same associations, the same unions, the same taxpayer-funded lobbyists, all of these made it where that only 55 cents on the dollar that was appropriated for special needs students or for career and technical education actually had to be used for those programs. It's horrifying. So if your child has a special need, the reality is the money not only doesn't follow them like it would with an education savings account where we are really in control and making sure that child gets the services they need, it goes into a big old pot, but now they actually only have to spend 55% of that on the entirety of special needs services. It's wild.
It's crazy. I'll probably get the time frame wrong, but I'll say about 6 or 7 years ago, the Houston Chronicle did a great series of investigative reports on special needs programs in the state of Texas.
Mhm.
And what they reported was extraordinary. It was shocking just how deficient the programs were. And at the time, in the aftermath of those revelations, it went back many, many years, Uh, Governor again asked Commissioner Morath to dig into it and get more a better grip on all the things, all the deficiencies within special education in Texas. And it goes directly to your point, which is they're taking large amounts of money, both state and federal, purportedly to serve these students
Hmm.
who are in some of the worst situations you could be. I mean, other than special needs, people in chronic poverty are probably the two most difficult populations to have to serve.
Hmm.
They were taking the money and not serving the student. And it's appalling on its face, but ought to be disturbing to everybody
Yeah.
that it is a requirement of federal law to serve these students and serve them well. And there was a gross indifference to their needs as exposed by the Houston Chronicle. But the parents knew what was going on.
Right.
In fact, some of the parents interviewed by the Houston Chronicle said, I withdrew my child from the public school, put him in private school at my own expense because at least I knew that they would get properly served.
That's right.
And what we're trying to achieve through the Education Savings Accounts program is to give every parent, special needs or otherwise, that same opportunity to move around that other people can exercise today just because they're personally financially well off.
That's right. That's exactly right. And that is what all of this is about, is we want to empower those parents that need to utilize an education savings account, but also put power back in the hands of kids that are in the public school system. Now that parents know, they don't have to direct the money. And far too often I hear we've got, it's about 5 massive law firms that sometimes when I look at the PEIMS data, that's our public education information management system for parents, you can go in there and see where they are. And there's always, lawyers and consultants, lobbyists are always at the top. And I have so many parents. I had one father from Dallas recently tell me that they had a meeting and they brought in 5 attorneys from this massive law firm. We would all know who it is. They sponsor all the things with every association and union, and to advocate against what would have probably cost less money than their hourly rate. I mean, you have 5 of them at probably $3.50 an hour, and he's like, "What is going on here?" And it's just this constant battle. I hear this all the time, but now that parents know kind of how it works, we really want to put power back in the hands of parents that maybe the public school is the right place, but I want to make sure that money is used for my child, and I don't want it steered out of the classroom to something that doesn't serve my kid.
That's why when we work on school finance issues, school finance should not be about here's one big check.
Yep.
What it needs to be about is the more specified areas of spending and how to spend that money is what's really essential, because then you can have real accountability tied to those dollars.
Yep.
We want to make sure that when we have legislation that the lieutenant governor particularly has been a huge advocate of increasing teacher pay,
Mm-hmm.
that money's going to teachers.
Yes.
That those resources aren't being diverted to some other expenditure, whether it's administrative salaries or whatever. It goes to the teacher.
Yes.
This is why smart policies like the teacher incentive allotment make so much sense, because only in that scenario can we be confident that the money that's supposed to go to that high achieving teacher gets to that high achieving teacher, or that particular special needs programs funds gets used in those classrooms that are helping those special needs kids.
Yes.
So as we're thinking broadly about parental empowerment, it goes beyond that. It's not just the parental empowerment piece, but they also have to have confidence in knowing that when money's going to our schools, it's going to be there
Mm-hmm.
to help their child and not feed the system of lawyers and lobbyists and superintendents who are the primary beneficiaries financially of the system.
Yes, absolutely. That's exactly correct, is making sure, and it's about parents, it's about teachers, but it's also about taxpayers. Look, Texans are smart. They can see what's going on when you've got 50% of kids that can't read on grade level and 60% that can't do math on grade level. But let's look at the workforce. We have got massive gaps in our workforce development, and
Yep.
business leaders everywhere. I think the Workforce Commission came out and said we're going to be short 10,000 electricians, 6,000 plumbers, all in 5.5 years, 2030. We're going to be short huge numbers of really skilled workers that provide a great income. And so much of that is just being steered away from CTE programs, the special education services, things that would really benefit Texans and get them back on track. And they can see their tax dollars. We're investing in our public schools. We're at nearly $100 billion. Let's be really clear. That's $16,792 per child is what we spent last year. Massive amounts of money. And yet our teachers, they keep, being said, well, we can't do this. I remember with HB 100, it was a $4 billion bill, and Representative Brian Harrison put an amendment on there saying 50% of this needs to go to teachers.
That's right.
Nope.
Nope.
Not doing that.
Nope.
Right? It's really astonishing. And I think that empowering parents and with the knowledge of what's happening with their kids, but also taxpayers
Correct.
who in good faith keep investing all of this money and say, why is only 40 cents on the dollar going into our classrooms? Where is that money going?
That's
And we're
right.
seeing it just out of the classroom, or we're seeing it on extravagant facilities,
Right.
or we're seeing it on massive bloated superintendent pay and assistant superintendent. And because they won't do merit pay for teachers, we're pushing all these great teachers that want to make more money. We're hurting them down the administrative path and taking them out of the classrooms. It's just a wild, wild setup that once we give power back to the parents, once we disclose what's going on to the taxpayers, we're going to say, nope, we're going to revamp this system. And quite frankly, the system's going to say, all right, we're going to have to fix this.
That's right. Look, we need a robust system of academic accountability, financial accountability, and transparency where the parents are really have some strong rights to not only bring up grievances, but to protest what's going on in the schools. And that's absolutely true where the academic accountability meets the financial accountability. So, you just raised a bit ago how we're having these workforce shortages. Why? And we'll set it up this way. We know Texas is a growing state. We've had massive population growth. Along with it has come economic growth. We have worker shortages. Is that because we don't have enough people? Or is that because they're not qualified to do the work?
That's right.
The essential reason they're not qualified to do the work is this. Even though under Governor Bush, there was a new law put in place to prohibit social promotion. What that essentially meant was you weren't doing well enough academically to proceed to the next grade, but we're just going to move you along anyway.
That's right.
So we have this prohibition on the books, but in effect, it still goes on today. What is the evidence of it? That we have in excess of 90% of high school students earning a diploma, but depending on the grade level, depending on the subject, we may have fewer than half of students who are actually at grade level in things like language arts and math. So, when that student who has been effectively socially promoted
Yep.
and has that diploma and goes to a workplace and makes himself available for a job, the employer can't hire them.
Yep.
Some people, 18, 19, 20 years old, are functionally illiterate. So, when we think about the imperative of things like parental empowerment, education, savings accounts, this whole array of issues that we're talking about, what is one of the benefits we'd like to see come from it? And that is more students who have a diploma who are actually academically prepared to enter the workforce. And but for today, but for the fact of this population influx that we've had
Yep.
people coming from California,
Mhm.
Illinois, these failed blue states, what we call the Texas economic miracle wouldn't be happening.
Mhm.
We need to continue it, but it needs to be continued because Texas students are ready to enter the workforce in enough quantity that we can keep this economic progress underway.
That's right, and one of the reasons I'm glad you pointed that out is the miracle, the Texas miracle that the whole world is watching. We're the 8th largest economy in the world. It's incredible, and for every person that's moving in, they have 2, higher education credential certificates or degrees for every Texan. But the key that I wanna point out is that school choice and empowering parents isn't new. This has been going on for 40 years across the country, and one of the states that I point to that does it great is Florida. And so when we're talking about you said that we have massive numbers of adults now who are functionally illiterate. I'll never forget sitting in a public education committee hearing and having a, very far left Democrat kind of lecturing everybody in the room about how just listen to teachers. I'm in Houston and 75% of people are functionally illiterate and da da da. Meanwhile, she had been a teacher and an administrator, decades ago. And I thought, these were your kids. You're sitting
Right.
here yelling at us. These were your kids that can't read. And so I say that because I look at Florida, who they passed their first school choice program back in 2002. And by 2003, it was implemented. They ranked their low income demographic, let me be clear, low income demographic ranked number 33 in the nation on the NAEP scores. That's our nation's report card. It tells us how our kids doing. Florida's low income kids, oftentimes minorities, inner city kids, low income kids, 33 in the nation. Within 16 years of providing an opportunity to go to a different school, Florida's low income kids went from number 33 to number 1, where they still are today. I mean, it's incredible. And look, we're Texans. We should be number 1. I want to be number 1. I want my kids to be number 1. I want them to be in a society and a state that's number 1. We should be doing this for our kids, and just introducing the choice is where we can force that course correction on the system. So, John, I want to ask you before we wrap up, give us some good scoop. Give us a good story. What's something that's crazy or bizarre or wild that you have witnessed within the public affairs and lobbying spectrum in the Capitol? And let me be clear, I hammer taxpayer-funded lobbyists a lot, because the majority of them are, they're not advocating for taxpayers, and that's very frustrating. But there are some great lobbyists that have not sold out to systems like yourself, and we're always grateful. You and I have worked together for years, and you have been a instrumental part of advocating for parents as a lobbyist in the Capitol. You're here fighting for parents. So when I criticize lobbyists, you know that that's not you, and so many other great men and women that are walking the halls, really truly trying to do what's best for Texans. But give us a good story. Tell us about something crazy that you've witnessed within the lobbying world that you think would be fascinating for our listeners to hear.
Well, let me answer your question this way. The most disconcerting thing that I've experienced, whether in government or now as a,
Mhm.
as a lobbyist, is this: that when all else fails and your opponent lies,
Yep.
we all have been a part of efforts and we failed. We've all wanted to meet some objectives and we didn't. That's the nature of our process. That's going to happen. We're all
Mhm.
disappointed. We don't want it to be. But last year, we failed to
Yep.
pass an education savings account. But at no point along the way did me, you, our closest colleagues ever concoct an argument, spread a lie, create a rumor just to try to pass our bill.
Mhm.
And what you see, it's endemic to this system, is the willingness to obfuscate and mislead and outright lie that is really the thing that I think deforms this otherwise good system. and makes serious policy debates difficult to have.
Mhm.
I've been in meetings on regarding ESAs over at the Capitol, and a legislator will hand me a piece of paper and say, "Well, how do you answer this?" Well, you know what, Representative, I can't answer that because it's
Right.
false. There's nothing to say. But these groups, so many of them, are so desperate to stop what we're trying to advance
Yep.
that they just lie.
Mhm.
And we see this repeatedly, and so I'm using what I see at the Capitol, but what plays out publicly? Something that you have to answer to every day. You know what? If you pass that ESA bill, you're going to defund our schools. You're taking our kids. A, we're not defunding your schools, and B, we're taking no one's kids because they're not your kids.
Right.
They're somebody else's kids.
Right.
But yet they're willing to engage in that type of political rhetoric, and in some cases outright lie, because in their mind the larger objective is more noble, which is to keep parents out of the public school system.
Yep.
So I would say that in my time around the Capitol, that's the most frustrating and disconcerting thing. I'm never happy to lose a fight, but if I lose, hopefully I'm doing it honorably.
Yes.
And I never want to be in a position where I'm looking at a legislator and saying, do this or that for me, predicated on a lie.
Yep. I think that's exactly correct. I remember, after that November vote where they killed the bill and removed parent empowerment and kind of the demoralized feeling. But I think we could walk away with our heads held high. I did after, licking some wounds and
That's right.
feeling. But I remember I sent out an email the week after to the entire coalition. Look, there are hundreds of thousands of people that are paying attention to what we're doing and a part of this. And I used Winston Churchill's finest hour speech. And it was kind of, that one day, 100 or 1,000 years from now, that the parents and the Texans will look back and say, when we pass this was their finest hour because we didn't stop and we did it the right way. And we're going to keep going. I think that's why so many people, I can't tell you how many people have said, I didn't support this, but now I do because I understand. And that's where, the legislators say that, but parents and people on the side of the political spectrum, they're like, I get it now. I see it.
That's
I
right.
know what's going on. So I think it's going to be bigger and better.
Well,
It's going to be the nation's largest education savings account for every single child. And I'm really excited about the work that we're going to continue to do together again with the legislature, but the people of Texas. That's who's made this happen. I heard somebody say they have never seen an issue come on with this amount of speed and momentum. And we're there because Texans have locked arms. But before we end, go ahead.
Yeah, let me just add on that point, please. It is no question it's people of Texas that are driving this, but every successful policy movement needs leaders. Thank God for Greg Abbott. Thank God for Dan Patrick. And thank God for you. Because the three of you have been not only stalwarts, but you've jumped in this fray. You've continued to engage. You've kept people enthused. So even when we hit those bumpy roads legislatively, and we hit one last year, here we are today because of that disappointment. We know we're in a far better position politically because of things that have happened in the campaign process. And we also know that we're in a better position today because you've kept your enthusiasm. Governor Abbott's kept his enthusiasm. Lieutenant Governor Patrick has kept his enthusiasm. So I feel like sitting here in the middle of the summer of 2024, that when you and I do a podcast again next summer, we will be talking about the implementation process for an education savings account.
Well, thank you. You are far too kind. I have not done a minuscule of the work that the governor and the lieutenant governor have done to push this issue forward. But I am certainly grateful to have partners like you and the entire Parent Empowerment Coalition that have really galvanized the parents across Texas. And that's why we're here. So thank you for your kind words. And thank you to Governor Greg Abbott and to Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick and to so many different leaders, Chairman Buckley, Chairman Creighton. I mean, the list goes on and on. So many people who have just said, we're going to fight.
That's
And
right.
we're not going to stop. You're not going to stop us. There is nothing that will stop us because we're fighting for our kids. And
That's
there
right.
is nothing that unites us more. And there's nothing that will make us fight harder than we're fighting for the future for our kids and every other child. So thank you again for your kind words. And before we wrap up, I'd love for you to look in that camera right there and talk to the parents of Texas as a father and tell them what they can do and why they can do it to ensure that our kids grow up to be free and prosperous Texans like we are.
For every parent, I would say this. We all know as parents that there's nothing more rewarding than to be a parent. And there's nothing that brings greater responsibility than being a parent. So for us as believers in parent empowerment, believers in liberty, believers in a strong family structure, it is absolutely essential that if we're going to continue what we believe to be the best state in the country and the greatest country in the world, as Governor Abbott always puts it, we have to be successful. And the biggest part of that success is you as parents being engaged, calling your legislators, participating in events, working with groups like Texas Public Policy Foundation, which has been a leader for so many years and on so many issues, to have that level of engagement where public officials know that when they make a difficult decision, and this one is not easy, it's still a difficult decision, that you have their back and they will have yours. So the greatest thing that you could do, other than raise your children to be good children and good adults, is to be engaged in this process and help us pass this bill.
Thank you, John, for being here. Thank you for sharing your experience and wisdom and your love for Texas and the kids and the parents and the freedom that we enjoy here. Thank you all for joining us today on Parent Empowerment with Mandy Drogin. And now you have the power.